Sorry, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Maxwell, and we've got Councillor Hampton as her substitute. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Okay, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest from any members, please? No. Sorry. Really sorry. Really sorry. Can we move on then to the minutes, please, to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of June?
Chair,
Yes.
if I may, please, we've had one amendment. Although under declarations of interest on the first page of the minutes, it should really be Norwich Charitable Trust. That's an umbrella term for all the charities within that. So if you don't mind, I'll amend that if that's members are happy with that.
I think that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Jack. Thank you. I'm sorry, someone's doing something around the back of the house, and I don't know what it is, but they made a noise, set the dog off. He hopefully will calm down in a minute. Apologies. Can we then move on, please, to the East Norwich Master Plan Progress Update Report? We're very pleased to have with us Anthony Benson, Martin Saunders and Tracy Coleman. Not the first update that we've had, but we can see from the progress report that some technical work is being done on some much more meaty issues now, and there's also further information on the public involvement process. So I'll hand over to the three of you, and I'm not sure who's going to kick off or how you're going to choreograph your inputs, but I'll hand over to the three of you now. And as I say, welcome, good to have you here.
Can I just say, Mike, if I was just going to do a short covering introduction to this.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judith.
No, that's absolutely fine. It's just there is a short written report. The purpose of this meeting, this report, is just to provide a progress update on the emerging master plan. And obviously, there is a report that the consultants have done at Appendix 1, which is a progress report. But I just wanted to say a few words of introduction before the consultants do their presentation, really. So overall, we would say that good progress is being made, and it's anticipated that the stage 1 master plan should be completed in October and signed off by cabinet in November, and that's certainly that's our intention at the moment. And in my covering report, I just sort of summarize some of the progress made today, but I won't steal the thunder of the consultants who are going to do a presentation in a minute. Apart from, I just wanted to say about the completion of the first stage of engagement that's now happened, and there's been a lot of meetings and one-to-ones with stakeholders, landowners, members, the community. There's been some community workshops, and just to say briefly that the public drop-in sessions at the end of July were very successful, attracted lots of people over a 2-day period, 180 people approximately, and generated lots of responses which will help to inform the master plan that's being developed. And actually, just to say as well that there's a detailed report of the engagement process on our website now, and there's a link at paragraph 9 of this report to that. And I think it's being broken down into sections because it's quite a big report, and it's got lots of, it takes up a lot of space. So you'll find it's broken down into several different sections, but there's a link at paragraph 9 of this report. And just to say also that the consultants are working on the substance of the master plan now, based on an understanding of the constraints and opportunities, infrastructure requirements, etc., and on the feedback from the initial consultation stage. So the stage 1 output will be a concept master plan for East Norwich, which is a high-level document providing an understanding of the development potential of the sites in terms of housing, employment, and other uses, including social and community infrastructure, and also the strategic infrastructure required to deliver these. And stage 2, just looking ahead a bit more, because after this stage we'll be moving to stage 2, what that will deliver is an infrastructure delivery plan with a much more detailed understanding of the infrastructure that needs to be delivered, and also viability assessment. It will also provide a refined version of the master plan, and also it will result in a supplementary planning document that will help to support policies in the Greater Norwich Local Plan, and that plan itself is going to examination in several months' time. And it should be adopted late next year. So just to say a very quick word about the timescales for moving forward. There's going to be another session of public consultation on the engagement on the emerging Stage 1 master plan in mid-October. There'll be a report taken to Cabinet in November, on the 10th of November, for sign-off of Stage 1 master plan and authorisation to proceed to Stage 2. And following that, the Stage 2 work will commence, and it should be completed by the end of March 2022. So that's my brief introduction. Unless anybody has any questions for me, I was intending to hand over to Martin and Anthony to do their presentation. If anybody has any questions, do let me know.
I was giving you a minute. So thank you, Judith, for the introduction, and to the panel, thanks for having us back on your agenda to sort of give you an update. I think Anthony is going to put some slides up, and then we'll do a bit of a double act through a few slides to give you a bit more detail on the update that Judith has just provided. And I'll let Anthony introduce himself in a moment. But for those who haven't seen me at these meetings before, my name is Martin Saunders. I'm a principal at a company called Avison Young, and I have the pleasure of leading the East Norwich Master Plan project team, the consultancy project team. So working with Allies and Morrison as our lead master planners, Hydrock as the engineering sort of consultants, and then RPS who are doing our cost consultancy work, so that we actually end up with a master plan that, when we get through the process that Judith has just described, is ultimately deliverable, as well as it is exciting and visionary, and doing all the things that we want East Norwich to do. So I'm going to give you a bit more of an update on what we've been up to since I last presented to you, and then Anthony will walk you through a bit more of the consultation feedback and how that is moving us into a master planning process. I think what we've always wanted to do with the master plan, and I've talked to you about a bit in previous meetings, is to really ground the master plan as it evolves in a really good understanding of the sites, the area, and the opportunities and constraints that it contains. So what we've been doing since last presentation is to really get to grips with those technical constraints. So that's from a desktop basis, that's also from being out on site, doing surveys. So we've done ecological surveys, we've done built and archaeological heritage surveys, and we've done some sort of transport and movement sort of visual assessments as part of that process. So we understand not just what it looks like on a map, not what it looks like in historic documents, but actually how it functions today. And then we've been using that information as a background to then a series of conversations with sort of technical stakeholders. So that includes the county council and city council officers around key areas like flooding, highways, education, economic development, to make sure that all of that thinking that exists within the city council and the county council in particular is embedded in the master plan. The concerns, the risks and the opportunities are taken into account. It's also allowed us to talk in an informed way with external technical stakeholders like Historic England, where we've had a few meetings with them, Environment Agency, particularly around flooding, and also the landowners themselves. So both the landowners within the red line boundary, so the likes of SPC and Fuel Properties as the development partner for Britvic Unilever. But importantly, what we've done since we probably last spoke is expand that engagement process out and really start to then talk to the neighbouring landowners as well. So engaging with the likes of the football club and ATB Lawrence Scott to make sure we understand, you know, as the people are joining the site that we're looking at, what their future plans are, and that anything we do within the East Norwich Master Plan area is of benefit and supports the wider sort of East Norwich area. So we're really making sure that everything outside of our red line boundary is taken into account. What we've done, and Anthony will take you through, is then a more in-depth public engagement, so public drop-in session that Anthony will take you through. And what you'll see now as we go through that is how that really is informing our process. I'll come back at the end and just talk about what we do from this point on so that you know where we are in the process. This is a sort of interesting point in the process because we're just getting to the point of the draft concept master plan. It's not there yet, so we can't share that with you today, but certainly over the next few weeks that will come into sharper focus and form the basis of the next stages of engagement with all of those parties I've described. But I'll hand you over to Anthony to take you through the work today.
Thanks, Martin, and hello everybody. My name is Anthony Benson. I'm a planner and urban designer with Allies and Morrison. So Allies and Morrison are an architecture and urbanism practice that sit within the team led by Martin and Avison Young. So we're involved in, very simply, the drawings and also many of the public's sort of conversations. So we've been involved in designing and leading that public-facing engagement. And we're now, as Martin said, deeply involved in doing drawing work on the sites. But the the main sort of milestone, that's the very significant milestone that we've reached recently, is that we've concluded our stage 1 listening phase of engagement, as Judith alluded to. And so there's some slides here, which only a few slides here, which really just give you a very quick heads up on the headlines that emerged from those conversations with the local community, and then some emerging thoughts on the key principles that we are seeking to capture and emphasize the importance of in the master plan, and will be unpacked a bit more in the master plan document that we're preparing as a team. So in July, as soon as the COVID restrictions allowed us to do so, we facilitated a 2-day community drop-in session at the Abbey, which was an absolutely magnificent venue to hold this event. So very grateful to those who facilitated that for us and supported us along the way. I mean, it's a little out of the way and off people's maps. So, you know, we were a little concerned about making sure we got good attendance, but I think the prospect of visiting this hidden away gem, I think did create a certain amount of interest, and we were really pleased that we had over 180 people attend across those 2 days, and it was a always busy but not uncomfortably so. Very, very informative session for us. So members of the team, both Avison Young side, Martin was there, and on my side, my team, people in my team were there throughout both of those 2 days, supported by Tracy here, who's on the call, and other officers at the City Council. And so that really built, that sort of culminated this first phase of consultation. So the stage 1 listening and learning stage also encompassed stakeholder workshop sessions, and there's a list of stakeholders that was that emerged from the City Council's database that we were allowed to contact and invite to conversations. And so that's local amenity groups, local interest groups and societies, etc. We had 2 workshop sessions earlier on in the spring. We also had members briefing sessions and officers briefing sessions. And then that led into this 2-day community drop-in event. And the drop-in event effectively marked the commencement of a 2-week period where an online survey was available for people to complete and post back their results. And also, as Judith touched on, all of that work has been captured in a fairly lengthy report, which is now on the dedicated City Council webpage for the project. So the council's comms team have set up a dedicated East Norwich Regeneration Project page, and that page has various links within it. And we have just relatively recently uploaded a summary paper which captures these principal stages of stakeholder and community engagement. So much more detail is available for those who want to read more in more depth about the feedback that we've got. But I think the most sort of rewarding really process was the drop-in sessions. We had over 180 visitors across those 2 days, and we had over 220 completed online questionnaire forms. And all of those responses have now been analysed and reviewed, and we are right now reflecting on those in order to help steer our concepts as they are emerging for this next phase of work. As I mentioned there, so that's a screen grab of the web page with those links to the different stages of engagement that have been encompassed in this initial listening and learning stage. So the drop-in events were essentially an exhibition, and effectively they were open questions really, and they really stemmed from a vision statement that had already been prepared a couple of years ago in a previous bit of work that we are effectively testing. So there was a vision statement which has a whole series of themes and priorities relating to sustainable communities, relating to housing and open space, heritage, employment, environmental protection, etc., and connectivity. And so effectively the exhibition and the online survey opened that vision statement up, unpacked it, took it apart, and asked for feedback and opinion on it as a vision statement, but then also the component elements that make it. And that's what the exhibition covered, and effectively that's now what we've got a whole series of responses on. So we had 224 survey results, and I think importantly we wanted to test the level of support for this overarching vision statement which the exhibition panel presented, and there was a positive feedback. The average rating in a scale of 1 to 10 was 6.6 as an average, but the most frequently clicked response was at a level of 8, representing significant support for it. And that vision statement and the boards was broken down into a whole series of issues relating to wildlife, heritage, community infrastructure, jobs, homes, connections, and road and traffic implications. And the 3 most frequently selected priorities, because we asked the question of all of these component parts in the vision statement, what do you think for the master plan is the most important issue to consider carefully? The 3 top scoring responses related to, firstly, protecting biodiversity and wildlife. And the site sits on the threshold between urban and rural Norwich, and represents an amazing opportunity to connect the city more directly and efficiently with the Broads. So that is a big responsibility of the master plan, and in doing so there are some significant heritage, biodiversity and ecology constraints we need to consider. So that reflects the work that we've been doing on understanding those constraints. Secondly, was respecting the area's special history and the heritage assets contained within it. Over 50% of people felt that was a very, very important issue for the master plan to consider. And that again reflects the complex network of heritage assets that sit within the sites. There are a range of recognised designated heritage assets, from the scheduled ancient monument of the Abbey, which is the highest designation of heritage that we have. There's grade 1 listed buildings, there's grade 2 star and grade 2 listed buildings, there's tree preservation orders, there's locally listed buildings, there's conservation areas, all of which have a role to play and already are designations within the master plan area. So really very, very important things to understand, and aren't so much constraints, but they're opportunities really, because we are opening this site up and this heritage up to become a much more integrated part of the city. And that is perhaps one of the most exciting elements of the master plan. And then the third most important issue returned to us was the importance of supporting sustainable and active travel, walking, wheelchair use and cycling. The site, most of the site is not accessible to the public at present, and yet it forms an area which is as big really as the city centre, the core city centre of Norwich. So there is an enormous opportunity to open the site up, create and connect to existing cycling and walking routes that traverse the city, that extend riverside walks, and make those direct connections between the city and the Broads. So I think the feedback, and there's much more of it to reflect on and consider, but those top line priorities and important issues, I think, do generally chime with the opportunities that we've already identified and are working with and around as the concept master plan begins to take shape. I suppose the big job for us now is to reflect on all of this feedback and set an agenda for the master plan and set some priorities for it to unpack and articulate further. Sorry, so a couple more slides on the top issues. So, you know, those three top issues were the drop-in session specifically. Overall, taking account of the stakeholder feedback, the members' feedback, and other one-to-one conversations we've had with landowners and adjacent landowners, another series of priority issues emerge, which, you know, aren't radically different. But flooding and ecology, I think, was probably the top issue in terms of people who visited the drop-in sessions and spoke to us on the day. People very concerned about the flooding issues, particularly with the deal ground. And so that is an issue we're taking very, very seriously. And we've got dedicated resources to do that. Traffic impacts, the roundabout outside County Hall, the already busy nature of the roads that serve it and come together at that roundabout, and the implications of lots more people living and working on these sites. And so again, we have dedicated inputs from Hydrock on transport planning, and we take that very seriously. But I think that the bigger issue is the opportunities to support sustainable and active travel modes across this site and connecting into the city centre. And then finally, there has been a number of concerns raised about the impact of development on the character of the adjacent Trouse Village, which itself is a conservation area and has a history that is woven into the Carrow Works site. So we take this also very seriously, recognise the concerns that residents of Trouse Village have on the impacts that new development across these sites might have on movements and buildings in the area. So it falls under the banner of good design and promoting respecting context and character, and that's something that the master plan, I think, can set out visions for how different characters in the site can be respected and a positive context can be created for this level of urban growth. So reflecting on all of that feedback, a number of key master planning principles are beginning to emerge, and I just wanted to use the remainder of this presentation just to quickly step through those, just to give you a sense of the key priorities and principles that the master plan will be seeking to outline. Not in a priority order, but number one, the importance of sustainable connections for sustainable communities. The site is locked at the moment, much of it. The access issues associated with getting public access to it are not insignificant. There will need to be new bridges, new junctions in order to open the sites up and connect the sites together, as well as make those external connections to existing streets and routes. Not least of which is this existing railway tunnel which connects the Carrow Works site, as shown in the slide, with the Deal Ground site. This is an existing bit of infrastructure, currently unused and sort of semi-derelict, but we are really taking very seriously the opportunity that creates to provide a direct pedestrian and cycle connection between the Carrow Works site and the Deal Ground, and then potentially on beyond to the Broads. So that's an example of the sorts of things that we're really working to make the most of. Not insignificant, quite complex. It's Network Rail's property. It goes beneath live rails on the London line. So there's all sorts of complications to consider if we're wanting to improve that connection. But there's no doubt the master plan is the perfect tool to promote and explore the opportunities that link provides. Respecting nature, as we touched on earlier, there's County Wildlife Site, which dominates the Deal Ground site, much of it on the east side. So we have ecologists in the team advising us on that. So we need to make sure that the master plan responds positively to the nature conservation assets that the site benefits from. Similarly, we need to ensure the master plan is resilient to flooding. There are a range of flood designations that are relevant across many of the sites, and we need to respect those. There's meetings being arranged with the Environment Agency on this specific topic, and of course we also have in-house specialists who are advising us and form part of the master plan team as our proposals emerge. Respecting heritage. The master plan has a big job to do in taking account of and building on an improving baseline understanding of the significance of the many heritage assets that the site benefits from, principally clustered within the Carrow Works site, the Abbey, the listed buildings, Carrow House itself, and all the social history that site embodies, and the many stories that people will have and personal connections they have with that site and the important role it's played in the history of the city. So we are meeting and have a series of meetings with Historic England, and they are taking an active interest in the site. Capitalising on the waterfront, we have an amazing amount of waterfront frontage across the range of sites that we're looking at. Carrow Works site on the north side, the utilities site, as well as the May Gurney sites, actually, to a lesser extent. So they have themselves a contrasting range of characters from a much more rural character on the eastern side of the site towards Whitlingham to this much more urban character of Carrow Works on the waterfront. So an amazing opportunity to extend waterfront routes as best we can and create this new waterfront environment. The need for intensity and diversity of use, we absolutely need to make the best use of this urban land. Urban land plays a really important role in protecting the countryside from development. So we need to make sure this urban land works as hard as it reasonably can do and promotes a range of uses. It's not a single use master plan. There is a policy context here which promotes both new homes and new jobs. So we are, with Martin's team, working on getting the right balance between the different types of land use that the site can support. We also, as Martin said, need to make sure it's market facing and deliverable. So that is a question of balancing up the values that the site presents and the costs of bringing it forward that the site must carry. So the new homes, the new employment spaces will generate values, but of course, getting to them, making them accessible, supporting them with the relevant infrastructure, and making sure that they're resilient to change, that all has a cost, and we need to make sure that that is in balance and in order to make sure that the schemes is deliverable overall. And there may be some gaps along the way, and we just need to work those through and understand those as best we can, speaking with all the stakeholders involved. And then finally, from me, our master plan will not be doing its job if it sets a rigid blueprint and sets one view of the world. The master plan needs to be flexible. It needs to be able to adapt and change and morph over time as conditions change and opportunities arise or decline, fade away. So it needs to look beyond the immediate future, and it needs to have a long-term perspective and tee up potential future changes as well. So it's important that it's flexible. It's important that it's not absolutely rigid. It doesn't hang on any one single opportunity that simply must happen. It's a collection of opportunities that are all part of a bigger whole, and that robust and flexible framework really will be at the heart of the master plan. That's it from me. I'm going to hand back to Martin now, who'll just tie up and give you an overview of next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. So just very briefly, and Judith sort of teed some of this up already. So over the coming sort of 2-3 weeks, we'll be evolving all of those things that Anthony's just talked about into a draft concept master plan. So the idea of that being that it's a series of plans and diagrams and sort of written strategies that sit alongside those to articulate how development could come forward, the mix of development and all of the issues that addressing all of the issues that have just been picked up. What we will do from that point is then to go through the next iteration of that engagement, both with stakeholders, so landowners, officers, community groups, and also I think really critically coming back to the public. So on the 15th and 16th of October, doing another public drop-in session, similar to what Anthony's shown you the images of. I think it will be again at the Abbey, so that again we get that lovely setting being right in the heart of the site we're talking about. What we then do from there is to take all of that feedback, refine that draft master plan into a preferred option concept, which then goes through a sign-off process to close out the stage 1 work, essentially. So that will be the final master plan report, which, as Judith has teed up, will get reported to Cabinet for the City Council in the November meeting. So that will allow us a number of weeks between that public engagement event and the Cabinet meeting to make sure that we are really hitting all of the issues and views of the public as that gets fed back. The longer term, obviously, not all of the things that can be raised, that will be raised by the public, will be solved in stage 1. There's much more detailed infrastructure work, delivery work, viability work to come in stage 2. So some of those issues, questions, concerns, opportunities raised within that public workshop, we will keep record of and hold in the report as a stage 2 needs to pick these things up in more detail. So that just gives you a bit of a feel for how moving from one stage to the other has that continuum of improvement and refinement of the master plan going forward. And as Judith said, that runs us through to sort of the end of Q1, so sort of end of March next year to finalise that piece of work. So that was what we wanted to take you through today. Hopefully that's a useful update of where we are, and obviously delighted to take any sort of questions anyone has as we go through.
Great, thank you very much, Anthony and Martin. Very, very clear and yet concise, and it's really, really good to see the progress that's being made, and it's really good to see the key emerging principles as well, which seem eminently appropriate. So thank you for that. And I know some hands have gone. I saw Adam first for questions.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to ask Martin and Anthony if they did any recording of the geography and/or demographics of those that responded to the consultation.
Yes, Councillor. A pretty good spectrum actually, and we do have, we do have a record of age profile, sex profile, ethnicity. The standard questions were part of that online survey, so we have the metrics back from that, and I think it was pretty successful in making sure that we got inputs from from a reasonably broad range. I think it's always slightly more mature audience that captures and feels engaged in these processes. But I think we were relatively happy with the responses and the profile of responses, and certainly being there on site at the weekend, in the evenings, outside school terms and outside school holidays, within the school holidays rather, helped in making sure that we captured families as best we could. So we were pretty pleased. I can, if you really want some detail, I can get the slide up that gives you the the actual percentages. And we also asked postcode information, so we have a geographic reference of where people came from, and no great surprises there. I think the principal axis of respondents came from the Brackendale area, along the Brackendale Road, really effectively between the city and Trouse. But generally speaking, it was a Norwich audience.
Was there any attempt to do any positive outreach to the council estates in Lakenham and Tuxwood, where perhaps there wouldn't be the high levels of engagement in a consultation that you'd get from residents on Brackendale? Because I mean, noting from the report, you said that the provision of jobs was pretty low down. However, obviously, an awful lot of people on those estates lost their jobs at Britvic and Coleman's. And obviously, for those individuals and those families, the provision of jobs is critically important, but perhaps not so if you're, a retired wealthy person in a massive house you own. So I'd be interested to know whether there was much engagement and much attempt to engage with those demographics and those communities.
So no, there was no specific outreach to dedicated, specific locations. But that's not to say that we couldn't think about that in the future, because there's at least 2 formal sort of dedicated stages of engagement. We've got an engagement stage that's fast approaching in October. But then, of course, that is all before the SPD is then put out for consultation in the new year. So there's plenty of scope to talk to you and other councillors and stakeholders about making sure that the right groups of people and areas are targeted, and a bit more proactive outreach where we think it's necessary to do so.
So thank you for that. Thank you for the question, Adam. And Councillor Davis also has a question.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, so I was going to ask a very similar question, but I wondered if you had recorded the postcodes, but the addresses in terms of areas of high and low deprivation where people were coming from, for the community feedback, as well as the 2-day drop-in. For the drop-ins on the 15th and 16th of October, I'm not sure the Abbey is the best place to do it, to be honest. There'll be lots of people with children back at school who don't necessarily have transport. And I would have thought it would be better to go somewhere perhaps like Morrison's, where a lot of people will be visiting. I am not surprised that most of the feedback came from the Brackendale area at all. And I think there does need to be some proper community outreach, because otherwise you are just going to be getting very, very middle class responses to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Who wants to respond? Anthony, are you going to respond to that?
Well, we'll talk to the officers about it. I mean, I think the intention was, as it stands, the intention is to use the same venue in order to see it as a kind of continuum of that conversation of carrying on. It's just a process of toing and froing conversation to reflect the stages of master plan production. It's an iterative process, both technically as well as in terms of the engagement that supports it. But we can certainly speak with officers about the prospect of looking at alternative locations. We'll have boards that perhaps could be made available in or moved to different locations. So we'll certainly take that on and speak to the officers.
I mean, it might be, Anthony, that if you want to keep the continuity of Carrow Abbey, and presumably there's nothing to stop you from doing that, but from also having a similar additional session or sessions at other locations.
Yeah, it's a possibility.
Adam, you've got your hand up again.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to suggest that there's 3 city council owned community centres on the estates in the area, and a library as well. So it'd be good to hold some positive outreach sessions at those locations, which would be easier to access for residents. Thanks.
Okay, I know Judith is listening to all of this, so is I'm sure taking it all in terms of the conversation with the consultants subsequent to the meeting. Right, I can see Leslie Graham's hand.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think it would be a good idea to consult people in places like Morrison's and maybe the football ground. But I don't think it's fair to dismiss the responses that we already have as middle class just because they live nearby. You know,
well, I'm sorry.
Well, we're getting asked different questions, which concern traffic, as in people getting in and out of Trouse, which concern rail options, which concern new roads that will threaten other areas. And those are places that maybe need to be consulted too.
Okay, so yeah, and I think actually your latter point has actually picked up what I was going to say, which is I didn't hear anyone dismissing views because they're middle class. I think what they were saying is that we need to make sure that we have a diverse input which reflects the entire community, and we make sure that those who find it harder to have voice are given opportunities to have that voice. And I think that's the point you're making about the other communities. So I don't think there's any disagreement here, Leslie.
Okay, nobody would argue with that.
Yeah. Karen?
Yes, just to say that it's not dismissing people at all who've responded. It's just that, you know, we will hopefully have young families wanting to move into this area, especially if there's a school going to be there, and we need to hear those voices as well. And, you know, those people may already be going to Tuxwood and Lakenham primary schools, and, you know, these are potentially the people who are going to be moving onto those properties. So it's not dismissing one group of people, it's about engaging as many voices.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about getting balance and making sure that everybody has a voice, and those who find it more challenging to have a voice are supported in that. So, as I say, I think we can all agree on that. Are there any other questions? Denise.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask about highway options, please, and the reference in the report at 1.1 to ask what is meant by the reference to looking at various highway options, because I can appreciate that there needs to be internal vehicle connections between the sites, for example, connection over the Wentham to open up the utility site. But what I'm very concerned about is looking at external highway links that the county might be putting forward that we as yet are yet to hear about. For example, over to Thorpe Road and Yarmouth Road. In the minutes of the last meeting, we're told that the growth in the Greater Norwich local plan is catered for within the current road network, which is absolutely right. So I'm very concerned that East Norwich should be designed as a low traffic development and not to build any new highways capacity external to the site. Thanks very much.
Shall I take that, Chair?
Yes, please.
Thanks, Councillor. I think that, you know, I suppose there's nothing sort of hidden about, or, you know, we're not sort of trying to explore things and then spring them on in terms of referencing to the highways options. I think that everything we're doing is a process of optioneering, but we recognise that when you look at the strategic road network in this part of the city, it is evident that there are issues in this part of the city which need to be taken into account. You know, the Carrow Bridge, the kind of inner ring road sort of breaks down, and if it was as simple as just doing a drawing, you would think about making some new connections. However, there are extremely sensitive issues at play here. There's incredibly precious heritage. There is incredibly precious ecologies. And so that is what is determining our response. We need to take account of the assets that the site has, the special conditions that the site benefits from, and make sure that the priority is given to promoting walking and cycling between sites and between the city and the Broads more generally. So I suppose our brief is not a strategic brief. We are doing a master plan for the site. The site is a strategic site for the city, but we aren't being asked to look and solve strategic transport issues for the city as a whole. We are looking to set out a master plan that makes the best use of existing infrastructure, junctions, site accesses, adds to that infrastructure where needed, but is not a master plan that is dependent on massive infrastructure investments. We're looking to be as efficient and respectful as possible. And that's really, whilst there's no sort of drawings to share at this stage with you, they'll soon be out. But I don't think there'll be any great surprises in those drawings in terms of launching some massive great infrastructure project. It's just about having the appropriate infrastructure to connect the sites up and to connect into the existing road network. And we're working within and around all these wonderful constraints that we benefit from.
Only it's important to note, of course, that and thank you for that, Anthony, that the County Council is a member of the Partnership Board and has full buy-in of the master plan. So there may be speculation or rumours or suggestions that they have other highways schemes which are connected with the site, but of course that would be preemptive at the moment and until we have the master plan in place. And so, as I say, they are full members of the partnership. They're signed up to the master plan. So, you know, I think we can relax and allow the master planning work to carry on, and ultimately a supplementary planning document that will be produced because that is the process. Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Mike. I was just going to request that this could come back to SDP before Cabinet.
Thank you for that. Yes, that is something that was raised with me separately. And I think that would require an additional SD panel meeting after the final report has been produced for Cabinet. So in that week leading up to Cabinet, So I think if members would like me to go away and discuss that with officers, then I'm happy to do that. Nodding heads or not? Well, no one's shaking their head, and a couple of people are nodding. So I'll take that as a request, and I'll discuss that subsequently with Judith. Any other questions?
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see the principles, and I look forward to seeing the drawings about how those are going to work. One of the key principles is about sustainable connections, and I'm wondering if the Trouse Swing Bridge will be part of the plan to improve, because if it's going to be a low car neighbourhood, people are going to need, as well as the walking and cycling network, good rail and bus services are going to play a key part as well. If we want to, if we're being sensitive to things environmental, which are also about people, then we need to absolutely minimise the demand for new roads. The bypass you can hear for miles around. If there were another piece of ring road, it would be hard to get away from that noise. And those are all active, community issues.
Who'd like to respond to that?
Happy to respond to that. Thank you for the question, Councillor. In terms of the Trouse Swing Bridge, that obviously we have a similar to Councillor Saunders said a moment ago. We have Network Rail on our partnership group, so sort of getting direct input from them around what is a parallel process. I think it's fair to say around the business case for the upgrade to this region. What we're doing in the master plan is to make sure that the way the master plan is structured, and let's go back to Anthony's point on flexibility, and the way it forms itself over time, and in later stages when we look at indicative delivery phasing, that it never precludes the ability to improve, replace whatever this final Network Rail solution is for the bridge, twin track it, and that it always keeps that land provision in place. Ideally the access for construction of works on that will fall into the phasing conversation as well, so that as and when that happens, the master plan hasn't precluded it. If we flip that the other way, which I think it's important to do from a master plan perspective as well, what we really also need to do is take into account the impacts of the existing bridge. You talked about the noise you get from the bypass at the moment. As you'll all be aware, you get quite a lot of noise from that bridge when the trains go over it. So obviously that creates an environmental impact on the quality of life of people who would live in the master plan area. So we have to be sensitive even of the bridge as it is today about where we put homes, jobs, etc. and so forth close to that piece of infrastructure as it stands today. So all of that sort of complex interaction between the way it is today, when and what might happen in the future from a rail engineering perspective is built into the thinking as we move through the next few weeks. But what we're really doing is making sure that we don't preclude the key thing that I think everyone wants to achieve, which is to get that bridge improved and dualed at a point in the future. So the master plan certainly looks to support that principle and, as best it can, help make it happen.
Will it?
It certainly is very. Sorry, Leslie.
Sorry, I'm wondering if it will include the potential for a rail stop, either on the site or at the old Trouse station. I'm not quite sure where that is, but I understand there was a rail stop in Trouse.
Yeah, so it's sort of down towards the Brackendale Road Bridge over the existing railway. It's down there. It's where Ben Burgess store a lot of the vehicles on that side of the road. Initial conversations with Network Rail suggest that rail stops within the site operationally are challenging, and potentially that distance between Norwich Station and here suggests that, you know, operationally that isn't something that they'd be looking to do, obviously with Greater Anglia as the train operating company. So, you know, those conversations have started to happen and sort of around the concept of master plan. But I think at this point, it's probably fair to say that there won't be a rail station within the concept master plan based on what the feedback we're getting from the train companies themselves. I think what's more important, but what's really key when we start to think about the Trouse Bridge in particular is, it links to Anthony's point earlier about sustainable connections, is how we start to use existing and then potentially future access points through the rail corridor. So obviously we've got our underpass subway between Deal Ground and Carrow works today that we want to upgrade, but certainly in the future when we think about, you know, if that whole track alignment starts to change, you know, they're things that we, you know, the master plan starts to argue should be built into that scheme as those improved connections. I think clearly we won't get a riverside walk even with an improved bridge just because of the way the dimensions of the bridge would have to work, but they're all the things. How do we create that that cycling pedestrian connection across that rail corridor, which is the big severance at the minute to get people into the city? So I think that's the other piece with the rail infrastructure, as it changes in the future, is to make sure that those connections come alongside it as we go through.
Thank you, Martin. Are there any further questions, please? Denise.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I wanted to ask please about flood risk, and 1.7 says that the latest flood model data from the Environment Agency has informed a series of maps that establish areas impacted by differing levels of flood risk, including allowances for the impacts of climate change. I wondered if the Environment Agency are actually going to revise their flood model data, please, in the light of the latest IPCC report, because that's suggesting that the sea levels are rising faster and higher than earlier predicted by the 2018 report. So it seems that that actually what's happening on the ground with climate change is because of constantly overtaking the science in some ways, and certainly overtaking all the work that bodies like the Environment Agency are doing. Thanks.
I don't think there's anyone here from the Environment Agency who can definitively answer that. And I'm not sure our consultants, well, if they know the answer, if they've had that discussion, that would be helpful, but I suspect we don't know. Does anyone, either of you, want to make a quick comment?
I think, the honest answer is we don't know. As Anthony said during the presentation, we have been for a while trying to get to talk to the Environment Agency. Their availability seems challenging, and so we'll pick that question up. I know we'll pick that question up in that conversation. Obviously, we've got their model that is based on data from, I think, 2-year-old data, but it's the latest model production, which was only produced earlier this year. That allows for 35% and 65% increases for climate change. So that is as we've said, that's in the thinking. But what happens to that model beyond the point it was released to us is a question for the EA that we can pick up when we speak to them.
Yeah, I think that's the appropriate way to proceed with that. Thank you, Martin. Are there any other questions? If not, just to say thank you to our guests. Thank you for your very, very good presentation. Also, your thorough answers, direct answers to the questions, which is always appreciated. And I know you'll be back subsequently at another stage to give us another update. So thank you very much. Good to see you all. and goodbye.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, let's move on then to item 5, which is the annual monitoring report. Charlotte is going to introduce this, and what I would say is, and I know she's going to say this, clearly this is for the period 2019-2020. It's come to us late because of, well, we've been through the pandemic, and it reflects data at a point in time. We did have a conversation about whether we would actually not publish 1920 monitoring reports and just go straight to the next one, because we could then include more up-to-date information as of a period which includes the pandemic and its impact. But we decided that actually this does reflect a point in time, and we do need to look at that data, even though a lot of it has been superseded now. I think also Charlotte in some areas has endeavoured to try and get some more up-to-date data, which she'll tell us about as she introduces this. But I think you're going to take us through it, Charlotte, aren't you? How long, I don't know how long you want, however long you want really, how long you need to do this.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'm not going to run through everything that I've written in the report. Hopefully you've all read it, but I will go through the key points. Just to obviously reiterate, this is just reporting factual information from the annual monitoring report for the 2019-2020 period, and that's obviously prior or largely prior to when the impacts of the pandemic were sort of being felt in this country. So the data doesn't really reflect anything around that, and we'll discuss any of those impacts when we then publish the next one. There are some extracts of information in the appendices because the AMR is quite a large document, but there is a link to the main document if you do fancy reading it. So just to run through some of the key findings, we'll start with the monitoring against the joint core strategy. So the percentage of household waste has increased in general, but has decreased very minimally in Norwich. And it's important to note that increasing recycling rates remains difficult because of the increase in the use of digital material and the fact that items are being made with less packaging. So that's just something to keep in mind as context. There's a mixed picture in terms of CO2 emissions per capita for each sector that the AMR reports against. Norwich saw a reduction in emissions across all sectors. So it should be noted, though, that this information is based on the latest data set, which is actually even earlier, 2018-19. That was the earliest that was available when this was published. Overall, there has been a reduction in the amount of housing delivered across Greater Norwich. So that's 2,075 units compared with the previous year, which was 2,779 units. This is a reduced figure, but it still exceeds the JCS target of delivering 2,046 dwellings per annum. Housing delivery for Norwich itself for that period was 495 dwellings, which is a significant decrease on the previous year's delivery of 927 dwellings. And this figure doesn't include completions from C2 communal and purpose-built student accommodation. So it doesn't provide the full delivery picture, but monitoring against the local plan targets for housing delivery, we delivered 798 units. So that it does include C2 and purpose-built student accommodation. So it's a better delivery picture when you take those into account. Affordable housing completions have decreased across Greater Norwich area from 724 dwellings to 658. In Broadland and Norwich, we saw an increase in affordable housing delivery, however, so specifically in Norwich, we went from 137 units up to 184 units, which is positive. And this, we had affordable housing delivered at Goldsmith Street, we had some at Carrow Quay, we had some at St Anne's Wharf, just to name a few. So that's kind of a main summary of the joint core strategy information. Moving on to talking about housing land supply issues. So we've previously sort of gone through this. I will go through it again, but just to say that within the AMR reports that we've reported to SD panel in 2018 and prior to that, the methodology for calculating the 5-year land supply was outlined in there, and there's been a change in the way that we calculate the 5-year land supply from 2018, and there was some concern that the change in methodology could obscure the trends or, you know, the information across time. So what we've done is there's been an additional land supply calculation using the same methodology that we previously used, so we can make a more direct comparison, but this is for illustrative purposes only. It doesn't mean anything in that sense. So they're included in Appendix 3. So the housing land supply prior to 2018 was an assessment against targets established in policy 4 of the JCS. So that meant that the land supply concerning Norwich was established across the Norwich policy area. So calculating the land supply on that basis for the 2019-20 period would mean we would have a 3.02 year land supply in the Norwich policy area. So table 1 in the report shows the remaining homes that would need to be delivered in the Norwich policy area before the end of the JCS plan period, and that actually exceeds the number of homes required to be delivered across the whole of the Greater Norwich area for the same period. And the reason for that is due to over delivery of housing in the rural policy area, which is about 118% of homes originally envisaged, versus those in the Norwich policy area where only 48% of homes required have been delivered to date. So as I said, there's been a change in which methodology we use now to calculate the 5-year land supply. We now do that using the standard methodology, which is set out in national guidance. This methodology can only be used across the whole of the district, so we do that as the 3 Greater Norwich authorities, and we don't calculate it for the Norwich policy area anymore. So calculating it using the standard methodology, at April 2020, our 5-year land supply was calculated as 6.16 years across Greater Norwich and 4.34 years in Norwich in the city. So the 5-year land supply had increased compared with the previous year's figures, which is positive. It was still below the 5-year threshold for Norwich itself. It should be noted that the information that's provided for that is based on a conservative estimate, based on information that was available at that time. And there are a number of large consents that have been granted since then that we weren't able to take into account, but we suspect we know will make a contribution to the 5-year land supply going forward. Although I said at the beginning that the data doesn't include information relating to the pandemic, when we ask for information and make contact with developers and landowners about their forecasts of the delivery on their sites for this 5-year land supply exercise, information was provided in knowledge of what was going on with the pandemic, as it was done in the latter half of last year. So they have provided that information in full knowledge of the pandemic, so that has been taken into account. So to summarise that land supply issue section, for the purposes of determining future planning applications, a 5-year land supply has been demonstrated using the standard methodology, but notwithstanding this, there's still under delivery of housing against the targets that were set out originally in the JCS. So I'm now going to move on to just highlighting some key points, the monitoring against the development management policies for Norwich. So some designated open space was lost within that monitoring period. Applications responsible for the largest losses during this period were deemed acceptable, given that there was replacement provision of open space and there were other benefits to amenity, heritage, biodiversity. And it's important to note that the numbers relating to changes in open space can vary quite greatly depending on how many applications you have in and the sizes of each application as well. It can fluctuate quite a lot. For air quality indicators, the two indicators that we measure remained relatively stable at the Lakenfields monitoring location. At Castle Meadow, there was a significant reduction. And although I have sort of had a discussion with an officer that looks at this data quite closely, and although a definite sort of causal link, it can't be established, they have said that this could be related to some roadworks changes to improve the flow of traffic, and possibly also the switching off of bus engines along that area as well. So as I've said previously, 746 new homes were granted in that granted consent in that monitoring period, and several large consents responsible for that. And then we've had the 798 completions as well, which is a reduction on what we had the previous year, 1,085, but that was a particularly bumper year that year. Interestingly, there were very few completions in 1920 from the Office to Residential Prior Approval, which contributed to the peak figure that we had in 2018-19. And a good proportion of the housing completions were delivered through student accommodation and C2 accommodation as well, approximately about 38% of those. The loss of office space across the city has continued into 2019-20, but this was at a reduced rate. New office floor space was permitted, primarily directed towards existing employment areas and elsewhere in the city rather than in the office development priority area. Despite a reduction in the amount of information that we have for retail monitoring for the 2019-20 year due to the pandemic, i.e. obviously there was a bit of an unusual situation with retail being closed and lockdowns, and also not having the resource to undertake surveys. The information that we did get for the city centre showed the retail sector still appeared to be performing well, and none of the primary or secondary centres fell below their required thresholds at that time. A retail monitor has been done for this year, and that's in progress at the moment, so you should get some more detailed information about the impacts of the pandemic on that in a little while. So that's the key points I think I wanted to cover from my report, but if you have any questions, just please let me know.
Thank you, Charlotte. Very, very good overview and excellent report, so thank you for that. Just one thing to clarify before we start, because it's been drawn to my attention that this report obviously covers the year 1920, and some things have changed since then. So just to clarify that on page 32 at point 1.8, it says the local planning authorities working with Norfolk County Council and others through the Greater Norwich Growth Board progressed implementation of the Greater Norwich City Deal agreed with the government in 2013. Working together, the partners support the private sector to deliver in numerous ways, including, and then there are 3 bullet points. And the second one says, delivering the Northern Distributor Road, A1270, and other transport measures. Now, in 2019-20, the City Council, being one of those members of the partnership, was at that point with reservations, and without having made a final decision, supporting the delivery of the Northern Distributor Road. As of this moment in time, we are not, but just before anyone raises the question, just to be clear, this is about the position in 2019-20, not the position today, right now. And so I think it would be helpful if we could just formally note that in the minutes for the avoidance of any doubts. Is that okay? Is everyone happy that we do that? Yeah, okay, nodding heads. So I can see in terms of questions, I can see hands going up. The first one I can see is Councillor Karen Day.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you, Charlotte. So on page 24, para 24, it says officers consider that the need for housing to meet local need is at least as great as it was previously, and great weight should continue to be given to this issue on relevant application. Obviously, we have our own local planning policy on affordable housing, but I think going forward, this needs to be really, really robust. We know that rent has increased by 9% in Norwich. We know that house prices have increased massively, and we are seeing families just unable to rent at the moment. It's just pricing people out of the market. Unemployment is rising, wages have stagnated. People are going to be paying increased national insurance contributions whilst having £84 a month removed from universal credit, and the energy caps are going to be lifted this winter. So this is going to make it much harder for people, working families, to actually afford to rent anywhere. So it's just a request really that our planning policy regarding affordable housing is really, really but robust going forward. And then when it comes to viability reports from the developers, I really would request that they are open to the planning committee before meetings, so they can be checked, because I do think there is a lot of, well, wriggle room around viability and the avoidance of delivering the required social housing and affordable housing needed. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. And in the past, we've talked about the principle of transparency in terms of those reports and understanding the methodology as well. And that's important as well as a truly independent assessment for the council. But thank you for making that point. It's a really, really important point. Okay, any other questions? I saw Adam, and then I saw Denise.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Charlotte, for the report. Staying on the affordable housing theme, how can we ensure that we go ahead of Broadland and South Norfolk and that they're not outperforming us?
Thank you, Adam. Good question.
That is a good question. I think it's probably, I mean, it isn't a question that I have an answer to currently, and it's probably a wider discussion and something that we need to have discussions with our housing team and about how we bring forward, how more affordable housing could be brought forward. I'm afraid I don't have anything else I can offer, unless Judith has anything to offer to that.
Well,
Judith is volunteering, so go on.
Well,
Judith.
I'm just wanted to say I agree with what Charlotte said. That it's something that we are, there are discussions we internally with housing officers and planning officers about this and bringing forward new schemes. So this is something that, I think if this continues, we should be able to do our best to move ahead of the other authorities. But things are in place to sort of address that, I would say.
Thanks, Judith. Denise, you were next. Oh, and then Karen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Charlotte. Yes, my question is, how is the Greater Norwich Development Partnership going to give greater weight to environmental protection and sustainable transport, please? Because the picture is really not very good. Not good on solar energy schemes, not good on waste recycling. In terms of the Broadland rivers, percentage of river assessed good or bad, really, really poor. Only 4% good or better for the past 5 years. Not good on sustainable transport, so really bad on numbers of people killed or seriously injured in road accidents. Not good on reducing the need to travel by car. And Broadland is really bad on transport carbon emissions on A roads. So, for example, I looked at the business energy department data for local authorities and saw that there's been a 25% increase on A road emissions in Broadland between 2014 and 2018, and that doesn't even take account of the NDR which opened in 2018. It won't as yet take account of the very high number of road schemes planned for the Greater Norwich area. So I'm really, really concerned.
So in terms of, I mean, so some of those indicators that you're sort of referencing there, for example, like the solar energy schemes, I mean, that's reporting what we've had planning applications for, and we have policies to support schemes like that, and it's dependent on landowners or developers coming forward with those schemes. What I will say about the Greater Norwich team is that they are aware of all of this information, as they're the ones that sort of pull it all together. So they're aware of the monitoring data, etc. And when it comes to the approaches going forward in the policy, I mean, that's obviously already being considered as part of the GNLP process and the consultations that have already happened with that. Do you have anything else you wanted to add to that, Judith, in relation to the GNLP?
All I was going to say was that we've got the examination coming up, and there've been lots of representations made, so maybe some of these issues will be fleshed out further, and there may be modifications following the examination, but I can't really say more than that, to be honest, without anybody here from that team who can comment more specifically on those issues.
Well, can I just come back, if that's okay, please?
Okay.
Well, some of these trends have been going on for some years. So numbers of people killed in road accidents, that's been going on. That's been seen as an increasing trend since 2015-16, and the percentage of rivers good or bad in Broadland, that's been going on again for the 5-year monitoring period, and I think probably before. The joint call strategy was really bad. It had a very poor policy on encouraging solar energy schemes. I felt very frustrated on the planning committee by that. Transport carbon emissions, the Green Group has made strong representations about the Greater Norwich local plan. In fact, it's going to make things worse. It's going to increase transport carbon. So I don't feel very confident in the Greater Norwich local plan and trying to reverse the picture that we've got here. So I do feel very concerned about the environment and how it's really not given sufficient weight. I just wanted to record that as my concern. Thanks.
And I think it's all of these policies are produced by consensus between the authorities concerned, and as you'll know, Denise, because I know you attend meetings and you observe meetings, that the City Council pushes really hard to have the environment pushed up the agenda and given due attention. We will continue to do that, but it's a matter of us persuading colleague organisations in the partnership to come along with us. And I think, I mean, there are signs, I think, that attitudes are changing and improving. But of course, the proof is going to be the nature of the documents which subsequently get produced. So, you know, this is 2019-20, but we continue to push for progress, as you know. I saw Karen had her hand up. Was that to respond to the previous point, Karen? Or was it a new point? It's a new point. Okay, well, I'll bring in Leslie first because Leslie's got a hand up. Hasn't spoken.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is on housing numbers and the other is on waste. But on housing numbers, we have a duty to cooperate. I don't think we have a duty to compete. I think it's eminently sensible that if we're not building enough houses and the other two authorities are building excess, then it seems very sensible to do those measurements collectively. I'd just like to know, there's a couple of things that really concern me about that though. One is that if we're counting our housing numbers in with neighbouring authorities, how can we prevent urban sprawl and overdevelopments in the gaps that between the city and the villages surrounding? And the other one is that in the Norwich applications, the list suggests that population density is going to be very high in some areas, and that's not a bad thing of itself. But how do we ensure that those homes are of very high quality, so that we don't have disruptive noise that reduces social cohesion? That we do have sufficient social housing within the mix. And the viability thing, I seem to remember that we put a motion on viability and someone else put in a loophole to say where practical or some such. So we're absolutely with you in pushing for transparency, and perhaps it's time for another motion on that without the loophole.
Well, I think the reason for the where possible is that there will be occasions when genuinely there are viability issues, and then it becomes a choice of development or no development. So I think the point that was being made, the point is not about a potential what you call a loophole, which I would just say, well, is a way of where there are genuine viability issues of taking that into account. A difference between that and having a transparent process which is robust and ensures that no one can claim a loophole where one doesn't exist, where more often than not we have the data to, well, all the time we have the data to challenge those who are claiming that there's a viability issue. You know, I would still stand by the decision that was made. I don't think it's a loophole. I think it's being realistic. But what we need to make sure is that the processes are robust and that they deliver for us to get as much affordable housing as we possibly can. So you asked a number of other questions. So who'd like to pick up well, Charlotte?
Yeah, I was just going to, just on your point about measuring housing delivery jointly, we produce those figures because the JCS and obviously the emerging GNLP, they are joint plans. That's why we have those joint figures. We do measure the housing delivery on an individual basis as well, so that we can see exactly where housing is being delivered across the Greater Norwich area. But the idea of having the joint figures and the joint plans is so we can plan the locations of development cohesively with our neighbouring authorities. But yeah, we do also do it separately as well, so that we can see what each authority is
Judith Lubbock looks asleep again. No, I can't on my computer. I don't know how to do it.
Sorry. I'm sorry about that comment. Apologies. I certainly heard it. Right. So where are we? So Charlotte, that was your response, yes?
Yes, that's fine. If that answers Councillor Graham's question.
I think it answers that the way we measure it, the numbers isn't going to change where we put stuff. The other questions were about, well, how do we ensure the high quality of dense urban housing, and how do we make sure that, how do we protect the green spaces between the urban and the rural areas?
So we have our current and existing development management policies, and each of the three authorities has their own development management policies, which are concerned with things around design and space standards, or, you know, provision of open space and etc. So those policies, which are individual to each of the authorities are the ones which are concerned with those issues there. They're not, those particular policies are not necessarily joined.
Okay.
Thank you, Charlotte. So
I had another question about waste. Do you want to take that a bit later, or shall I ask it now?
happy to. I'm not surprised there's a question about waste. So go ahead.
The waste performance is very disappointing, but also the figures are quite unclear. If it's hard to improve the recycling rate, I just wonder if that's the right thing to be measuring. The recycling rate will go down for good reasons, like there's less waste packaging, people are not consuming more than they need, and for bad reasons, people are broke and they're not buying stuff that they do need. So shouldn't we be measuring the amount of stuff that goes to landfill as an absolute amount rather than as a proportion? And why is repair and reuse not in the equation?
So I think you have possibly made this point before. I seem to remember we had this conversation with last year's report as well. I think that the monitoring indicator, which sets out what we need to measure and why we need to measure it, is something that's this is the joint part of the joint core strategy monitoring framework. So that's something that's already in the framework, and that's why we monitor that. This is obviously, it's an issue, like, as you were saying, that, about measuring absolute waste, or at least measuring things as a proportion of absolute waste. And it's certainly something that we will keep in mind when we have new policies, or if we're updating any policies in future, and our monitoring framework to go with that, that we will certainly take that on board. If there's a more effective way of measuring those policies, then we'll definitely keep note of that.
Yeah, it's a point well made, Leslie. So I've got on my list, I've got Karen and I've got Judith. I'll take Judith first because I think Karen's spoken before.
I think Karen would like to hear me speak as well. I do feel that these statistics are for the 2019 and 20 year, and knowing what's happened since spring last year and spring this year, it may be that these statistics really don't represent a trend because so much has changed, and when we come to look at years, that there will be drastic differences. So I think it's just very unfortunate that so much has changed in between these statistics coming out that they may not be so worthy of debate, as it were. I mean, it's interesting to look at them, but whether or not they are actually indicative of a trend, I don't know. I doubt somehow, but I was interested in the number of killed and seriously injured road traffic accidents, and to see that Norwich is faring better than Broadland and South Norfolk. And although it's only a reduction in 5 fewer road traffic accidents, it is actually a decrease in the number of accidents. And I do hope that trend certainly continues, but I know that that's just a contextual sort of a statistic that we carry. We don't really have any well, I suppose 20 mile per hour zones might well have an impact on that, but it is a contextual sort of statistic, isn't it? I don't know if the officers want to say anything about that. Do we? I
mean, it's interesting on that, Judith. The KSIs. I seem to remember that urban areas, and correct me on this, officers, if I'm wrong, that urban areas tend to perform better than rural areas on KSIs. Generally, we've got fewer faster roads, motorways, trunk roads, country lanes where you can drive at 60, all the sort of stuff, which is really, really dangerous. And we tend to have lower speed limits and more regulation than in rural areas. So I'm sure I'll be blasted by officers if I've got that wrong, but I vaguely remember something like that. But it's good to see the numbers down, albeit, as you say, it's a fairly small number. And you're absolutely right, as we said at the beginning, these are, this is a report for 2019-2020 before the pandemic. So whilst we can look at trends over a period of time up to then, from that period onwards, all bets are off as to what the impact might have been. And, you know, we'll find that when we see the next one. But Charlotte's nodding. Did you want to come in, Charlotte?
No, I haven't really got anything to add to what you said there, Mike. You are on mute though, Mike.
Sorry, I'm too handy with that mute button. No, it's good I've done it. So Karen, I think you were next on the list. Or was that an old?
Yes, thank you. So this is going back to page 60. We have a table here where it says data discontinued for percentage of working age population receiving ESA and incapacity benefits. That data is widely available on DWP Stat Explore, and that's updated monthly. And that also includes the data for people on any form of welfare benefits, which I think should be included. There's also Public Health England data where it says data discontinued, which I found on the Public Health England website. So I don't know if these, whether or not just the name of the source has been changed or something, but that the data missing does seem to be widely available.
Could you give me the numbers of the tables, please, Councillor Davis?
Yeah, table 3.17, objective 11.
That's great, thank you. The data for the joint core strategy is pulled together centrally because it covers all of the three authorities. So I don't know the reason for that, but I'll pick it up with the person that does collate that and I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Charlotte. Any other questions on the monitoring report? Adam?
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate we don't make the formal distinction anymore in terms of the new methodology, but I was wondering how we can get Broadland and South Norfolk to concentrate more of their building in the MPA and less in the less sustainable RPAs. Councillor Carlo quite rightly picked up on the increase in CO2 emissions from transport in Broadland, given that Broadland are locating most of their building in rural clusters, to use the term. That's not particularly surprising. So how can we address this or try and address this?
I can have a go at answering that. I'm not really sure if I have the answer, but I mean, I think that there's some very large sites in those districts in the NPA that take a while to sort of get away, and maybe those figures will change significantly. But I don't have the detail behind that, at my fingertips. But I think there may be sites that will come on stream soon that will actually change that sort of balance. Really, I don't know, Charlotte, if you know any more about the detail of that.
No, I'm afraid I don't. Sorry.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If there are none, then I think we've come to the end of the meeting. So thank you everyone for coming and attending, and thank you for your questions, all excellent questions. Just one thing might be helpful, Judith. I don't know whether it's possible whether I could get my hands on a copy of the consultant's presentation on East Norwich. I don't know if that's something which could be circulated to committee members, but I'd certainly like to have a copy of it.
We've got a copy, so if I send it to you, Jackie, would that be good?
Yeah, if you could email that to me, that would be brilliant.
And email it to you, okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then Jackie will send it to members of the committee. Great, thanks everybody. Have a nice rest of the day. Try and avoid the rain if you can. It's still carrying on out there. Cats and dogs, never mind. A good evening to stay in, I think.